So today we're going to talk about the method complete the square, which is another method to solve quadratic equations. Most of the time, whenever you don't think you can solve a quadratic equation, what we've previously said was prime, we can actually solve by completing the square. So the first few examples that I'm going to do are not actually completing the square. These are just setting up some of the skills that you need to be able to complete the square. So for this first one, notice that it's squared on this side, and you have a perfect square on the right hand side. So step one, we're going to go ahead and take the square root of both sides. So we take the square root. Square root and square are inverse operations, so those are going to cancel out. That leaves me with x plus 3 is equal to the positive and negative square root of 25, which is 5. Next, we are going to subtract 3 from both sides. Now, notice when you subtract 3 on this side, you have a positive and negative 5. So when I subtract 3, you're actually going to be setting up two separate problems. So step 3, we're going to solve both problems. So that's going to be x equals 5 minus 3 and x equals negative 5 minus 3. So x equals 2 and x equals negative 8. Those are the simple ones where we already have the perfect square on the right-hand side. For example 2, you do not have a perfect square on the right-hand side, but we are still going to take the square root of both sides first. So we take the square root of both sides. The square and the square root cancel because those are inverse operations, and that leaves me with x plus 3 equals the positive and negative square root of 20. Now we are going to subtract 3 from both sides. And when we do this, we typically write this in front of the square root sign. So step 3, you're going to write the two separate answers. We haven't simplified radicals yet, so we can leave it just like this, where we do x equals negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 20. Now we're going to take this and we're going to move another step. First, let's talk about taking the square root of a negative number. Can we take the square root of a negative number? We can't, because there is no number times itself that will give you a negative number. A negative 3 times a negative 3 would give me a positive 9. Positive 3 times positive 3 gives me a positive 9. So there's no way to get this negative. And the same is true here. We can't take the square root of both sides, because if I did this, I would be taking the square root of negative 25, which I cannot do. So we're going to go back and look at the perfect square trinomials, which we learned in the last chapter. So x squared plus 10x plus 25. I know that that factors to x plus 5. We've discussed this. X plus 5 squared. This is just a simple pattern. The next one, this one factors to x minus 7 squared. If you multiply these out, you're going to come back out with this trinomial. So let's take that and apply this here. We can force this equation, which normally we wouldn't be able to factor. If I looked at this, I would say, well, there's no two numbers that multiply to give me 5 and add to give me 10. But I can force this to look like this. So here I have x squared plus 10x plus 5. The only difference between this one and this one is that this has a 5 and this one has a 25. I want this to also have a 25, so I can factor it to look like this. To do so, I would need to add 20 to both sides, because my goal is to get to 25 here for my C term. So x squared plus 10x plus 25 equals 20. So let's take that a step further. I can rewrite this now as x plus 5 squared equals 20. And that looks like the problems we were just doing before. So let's go ahead and put all of these things together. So step 1, we are going to substitute 0 for y. And I'm going to go ahead and put my y over on the right-hand side. I just prefer that. So x squared minus 6x plus 3 equals 0. Next, we are going to find the number that makes it a perfect square. And to find this number, we use the formula b over 2 squared. We take the b term and we half it and then we square it. So b divided by 2, negative 6 divided by 2 would give me negative 3. And then negative 3 squared is positive 9. That means I want my c term to be 9. This does not mean that I want to add 9. It means I need to find a way to get from 3 to 9. Well, obviously, this means that I need to add 6. And since I added 6 to the left side, I need to add 6 to the right side to keep my equation balanced. So step 3, we are going to add 6 to both sides. So I still have x squared minus 6x plus 9 equals 6. I'm going to factor my trinomial next. Since this is a perfect square trinomial, I know this is going to be x minus 3 squared equals 6. Next, we are going to take the square root of both sides. Again, my square and square root cancel because those are inverse operations. So I have x minus 3. And don't forget that this is going to be the positive and negative square root of 6. And then step 6, add 3 to both sides. Because we want x by itself. So add 3, add 3. And that will give me x equals 3 plus or minus the square root of 6.